Hello, I'm Cindy Miller with the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center Cognitive Care Network. I'd like to welcome each of you today to the program Losing the Way, the Whys, What, and How to Manage Wandering Behavior. I'd like to start with just talking about some of those wandering myths, what people are thinking about individuals that have dementia. The first one is that some people assume that you would always recognize someone with dementia. And of course, that's not true. We have individuals that are under age 60, look young and vibrant. We have older individuals with disease that are active, participating in functions, going shopping with their loved ones. So we don't always recognize, there's not always outward signs that a person has Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. Another myth is that individuals with the disease are frail. And that's a huge myth. We don't see that the significant physical decline and the frailty until later in disease. So that statement is not true. Many of our clients can still walk. They may participate in running events. Some of them swim. They go on trips. So, of course, that's a huge myth. Another one we hear is that most people with dementia don't live at home. And that is absolutely false. In fact, only about 20% of individuals with Alzheimer's disease or another dementia live in long-term care facilities, making the majority of those individuals being cared for at home. A common statement that caregivers will say is, my loved one never leaves my side. And I believe that caregivers' job is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. However, there are moments and times when you, as a caregiver or family member, do not have your eyes on that individual. We know that the highest risk for wandering is in the middle stages. And there's a number of reasons for that. As the person progresses to the middle stage of disease, they may have psychosis. They may experience hallucinations, seeing things that aren't there, or delusions, believing things that aren't true. They will become disinhibited. Their social skills will decline. It will become unimportant to them how they look, how they dress. We may see someone in the wintertime have a light shirt on and no jacket. We may see someone in the summertime, for example, wear layers of clothes, particularly in these middle stages. Language becomes extremely difficult for someone in the middle stages. They will have difficulty articulating what they want to say. They may use miswords. They may not be able to communicate and even share words. They may have aphasia. Language deficits are huge and extremely frustrating for the person with disease. We'll see more executive function destruction. What that means is the person's ability to plan, identify safety risks, and their logic is impaired in a significant way. We will also see visual spatial issues. Their peripheral vision will decline. They will view things in a different way than we do, and it becomes very difficult for them to find their way. We have what I would call a noise filter. In other words, you and I can be in a room, a radio can be playing, a dog can be barking outside, the TV can be on in another room, and we're still able to manage our task at hand. That becomes extremely difficult for the person in the middle stages of the disease. In fact, they have a very difficult time discerning noises, what they are, and where they came from. And of course, getting lost. This has become a huge risk in those middle stages. So here's some facts about wandering and all the issues surrounding wandering. 67% of people with a dementia are at risk for wandering. The wandering can happen by foot, which is the most common way. It can happen in the car. People can get in the car and drive for miles, or other forms of transportation. Maybe they live in the city and hop on a bus. Maybe they crawl in the cab of a truck driver, unbeknownst to the truck driver. We also know that when a person gets in a car and drives for miles, the only thing that they usually stop it for is if they run out of gas or they get stopped for a traffic violation. So literally they can drive for miles and miles. I recall a client I had many years ago. Her husband was taking a shower. She was in the middle stages of disease. She grabbed the keys, got into the car, and ended up in Western Kansas. Fortunately, she had identification on. She had stopped at a truck stop, and they were able to safely return her back home. Another fact that I want you to keep in mind is that you cannot always prevent those triggers that lead to wandering. We're dealing with a unique individual. Wandering may not be predictable. In other words, you may not be able to identify if the person is restless and just is going to walk out the door or leave the area that you're in. And a huge fact is that I want you to remember is wandering is an emergency. If the person has wandered off, please look at it as an emergency situation that needs to be addressed immediately. So is this a problem? Yes, it's a significant problem. About 69% of the cases are associated with severe consequences. The person could wander in cold weather and freeze to death. The person could wander in warm weather and have a heat stroke, become severely dehydrated. If they're driving, they could end up in an accident and hurt themselves or someone else. Severe consequences are associated with wandering. We also know that the survival rate for the person with dementia is about 54% if they're not found within the first 24 hours. As a caregiver or family member, I don't know if you're aware, but about a third of you are not even aware that wandering is a problem, and that the majority of wanderers are repeat. So if your loved one has wandered off one time, please know that it will more than likely happen again. And we will be talking about perhaps some ways to prepare for that. So why does the person wander? Here they're in a home environment, they're warm, they're cozy, they're with loved ones. So what causes them to wander? First, they may feel stressed about something, unable to articulate that to you, unable to talk about it, and they're feeling very restless. They need to get outside. They need to be doing something. Perhaps they have some agitation. Again, you're not understanding why they're agitated. Perhaps it's something in their long-term memory that they're dealing with. Maybe something happened in the environment that they can't let go of. They may have a medical condition on board. They may have an infection that you're not aware of. You know, when individuals can get a urinary tract infection, again, they're not always able to say, hey, I have pressure and I'm not feeling good and I need to go to the doctor. Um, but that can cause them to exit seek. Anxiety with all the other conditions can cause them again to want to leave. They're anxious about something, but they can't tell you what that is. And a huge piece is when, with their inability to recognize familiar people and places. What we see happen in the middle stages is at different times, the individual with Alzheimer's disease or another dementia may look at you and believe that you're a stranger, because in their mind's eye at that time, they're experiencing long-term memory and believe that you shouldn't be looking like you do and looking maybe much younger. They may not recognize grandchildren. They may not recognize their adult children and believe they're strangers in the home. We also see instances where they don't believe that the home that perhaps they've lived in, for example, for 30 years, is not their home, and they believe that they should be somewhere else. I mentioned this earlier, but they may be having, again, those hallucinations, seeing things that aren't real, and delusions, believing things that aren't true. They may also be paranoid about something. Perhaps you recently moved to a new location. Maybe you downsized, maybe you moved into a long-term care community, into an apartment. Maybe you moved in with adult children. But the person with disease is having difficulty transitioning to that new location and understanding the environment around them. They will also do what I call aimless, non-directed walking. And actually, I think that's something we can all do at sometimes. I know I call window shopping kind of non-directed walking, where you just walk from one store to another, not with any planned purchase in mind, but just kind of wander. The person with disease will do the same. They will also misinterpret some sights and sounds, which will create fear. And again, their fear can cause the person to exit seek or to wander off or to be worried. And in the middle stages, the person's confusion and cognitive impairment has increased significantly. So another reasons why the person may wander, we all have routines that we do every day. Perhaps this is a person who got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They maybe drove to a local store or cafe to have coffee with friends. Maybe this is a person who got up and always took the dog for a walk every morning. Maybe this is a person who went for a long walk or took a run. Our routines don't go away in our mind just because a person ends up with a dementia. Maybe they believe they're going home. They need to go home. Maybe they need to go in their mind to go see their grandparents, even though you, as the caregiver, and we know that the grandparents have been gone for many years. They may be on a mission. Perhaps there's a volunteer organization they worked for in younger years. Perhaps there's something in their mind that they need to get done. And so they're going to leave to try to finish that project. Another reason is lack of supervision. And again, I know all of you are well-intended and want to provide the best care and love for the person in your care, but we can't be with the person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So in those moments, the person may leave the home, particularly when they're in the middle stages of the disease. Then there's that long-term desire to fulfill obligations. Maybe the person in your care was the primary breadwinner. Perhaps they were a person who picked up their grandchildren from school every day. Whatever those prior obligations were, again, they spend more time in their long-term memory, so they may believe that they need to continue to do that. So what happens when a person does wander off, and what are some of the family responses that we see? Unfortunately, some family members and caregivers may look for hours before they contact the police or the county sheriff's department. And I want to tell you right away, as I said before, this is an emergency and contact needs to happen immediately. Some, again, family members may need more disease education. There is a significant long-term learning curve when you are caring for a person with Alzheimer's disease or another dementia. I tell people all the time, even though I've worked in this field for over 35 years, that I continue to learn new things about disease and about how to care for a person that has a diagnosis. Family members may also minimize the risk of wandering by saying, oh, they haven't wandered yet, or they've lived in the same house forever. Another common one I've heard is, well, all the neighbors know them, and so they'll be okay. Or perhaps they live in a small rural community, and I'll hear, well, everyone in town knows them. So if they do wander, they'll see them. But we'll talk about how far that an individual will wander. So in rescue and response, particularly when you have the police department and the sheriff's department, the person will often wander away from the road and off the sidewalk. They may not follow a usual path that they had perhaps walked on before. It's important when looking for the individual to look in the underbrush, any area with cover, and near the water. Usually they won't cry out for help because, again, because of fear, or maybe they're not realizing at that time that they're in trouble. And more often than not, they won't respond to their name if you call their name out. They also leave few physical cues. The woman, if it's a female, she may not have her purse. They may not take a jacket off if they're hot. Few physical cues. If the police department or county sheriff's department has search and rescue dogs, it's important that they employ those, utilizing articles that have the sense of the loved one. And we do know that about 95% of people are found within 1.5 miles of their home. You will also want to talk to the police department about issuing a silver alert. One of the criteria for issuing an alert is that the person does have a dementia on board. So always talk to the police department about that. Let the search and rescue team know that the most common name that the person is familiar with. For example, if their name is Robert, but forever they've been called Bob. Let them know that it is Bob they're looking for. Maybe the person's name is Henry, but friends and family always call them Shorty, for example. Let them know that too. Other areas to look for your loved one would be behind locked doors, in wooded areas, dangerous areas, or areas that are barricaded, perhaps street repair, and those tight spots behind buildings, between cars. Don't overlook any area when you're looking for someone. So here's some ideas on reducing the risk. And again, these are tips. I want to say that there's no guarantee your person will not wander if you utilize these tips, but hopefully it will reduce their risk. There's lots of technology products out now. If the person is still carrying a cell phone, you can put an app on their phone and yours so you can track where they're at. That actually is a good thing to do even when they're in the early stage. So talk to your loved one about that. There's also, for example, an app you can put in the person's shoe. And so if they wander off, you will be able to track where they're at within a certain mile radius. Certainly talk to the physician about the management of some of those neuropsychiatric symptoms, the hallucinations and delusions. Physical activity daily, ideally when the weather's good, doing it outside. That could be taking a walk, being outside visiting with a neighbor, being outside in nature, digging in the good black earth, planting flowers, maybe raking leaves if they can, throwing the ball to grandchildren, anything that they can successfully do outside. It's important for them to get that fresh air and physical activity. In terms of supervision, please do not leave the person in middle stages of the disease in the car alone. They are as much danger risk as a young person or small child would be. When they're in the car, if it gets too warm, they may not have the ability or the understanding to roll the window down. If all of a sudden, when they're sitting in the car alone, they wonder where you're at, or they're missing you, or they have some fear, they may open the door and walk out and try to find you. So please do not leave them in the car alone. I recognize that it is challenging to take a loved one shopping with you when they're in this stage of disease. It takes much longer time. There's many distractions, but I can't stress enough, please do not leave them in the car. Continue to seek out education about the disease. If there's information online, you can contact us at the Alzheimer's Disease Center at KU. We have support groups that you can join to get more information. And of course, the staff at the center and at the Cognitive Care Network are always available to answer your questions. Another important issue to consider is how not to leave the person alone when they've moved into this stage of their disease. Look at how you can incorporate some help. There's those informal supports, like having a neighbor come over for a couple hours when you want to go get a haircut. There's family members, maybe it'll be adult family members, maybe it'll be older grand might be able to be helpful. There's also friends that want to help. I recall another woman with disease in a small rural community who started wandering. It was pretty predictable because she had been a nurse at a local hospital for about 25 years. So every afternoon, she would walk out the door to go to work because she had worked the evening shift. Her husband talked to some ladies at church, and 5 days a week, they rotated, coming in for 2 hours in the afternoon so he could take a break. And the wonderful thing about that was when he asked, they wanted to do this. So keep that in mind. We need to ask people for their help. Some people really want to help, they just don't know what to do for you unless you ask. Some people can't help for various reasons, and some people just won't. But I can't stress enough, please reach out to others and let them know how they can best support you and your loved one. There's also those formal supports, and that would be hiring someone to come into the home. Um, so you can have a respite break, but also so you can go do some of those tasks that you need to do without having your loved one along. So other ideas for reducing the risk. On your doors at home, you can put the door locks out of sight line. As individuals are in that middle stage of the disease, they usually will look straight forward and not so often look up or down. So you can put some of those locks higher on the door and they may not see them. You can also purchase those child-proof doorknobs. They're little plastic covers you put on the doorknobs, so some individuals will have more difficulty turning the doorknob. Another idea is to camouflage the doors. Paint the door and the woodwork the same color as the walls, and sometimes that can keep them from exit seeking or finding that door. You may want to install a security system or a system that when the door is opened, there will be buzzing or loud noise that you will be able to hear, particularly if the person is exit seeking in the middle of the night. You can also just put cowbells or some kind of bell on the doors. You may want to install some lights that will automatically come on when the person walks by them. You can use some signs that say stop, do not enter. Sometimes that helps. Use some safety gates so they can't get through, don't walk through a door. But be sure they're up high enough so they won't trip over them, not see them and trip over them because they're lower. And then another piece that needs to be considered is to hide all the vehicle keys. You know, when a person enters middle stage of the disease, they have had a long history of driving, and they will not recognize that it is not safe for them to drive, or that perhaps they haven't even driven for a year or two or longer. But in a moment, they could take the keys and get into the car and drive away. So please keep those keys hidden so they don't have access to them. That concludes our program on wandering. I hope you find some of the tips that were shared will be helpful. If you have any more questions or want to talk more about this issue, please don't hesitate to contact me. The information is here, or one of my colleagues at the Cognitive Care Network. Thank you for attending. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Bye-bye.